Anyone who is in line by 9 o'clock will still get the chance to vote. Now, historically, voter turnout is lower during midterm elections compared to presidential election years, but voters across Western New York turned out in droves. We have team coverage tonight on some local elections of interest. 2 on Your Side's Ron Plants is live tonight at Erie County Democratic headquarters. Ron?
Mary Ellis, things starting to heat up here. The Democratic Party faithful starting to filter into the Buffalo Irish Center here. We're seeing the pizza come in. That's important as well. Now, we're going to quickly go, if we can right now, to some video of State Senator Sean Ryan actually voting in that 61st State Senate district race. And that is one of the key races as he's up against another incumbent, one of only 2 races in the state of New York where this is happening. So very interesting situation there. Town Supervisor Brian Kolpa telling me they're seeing long lines in Amherst in that district. We're hearing, though, in Buffalo, some of the precincts are seeing a low turnout. We'll have to see what happens. One other quick note, a crew from Elmira is here because of that 23rd congressional race with Max Delapia and Nick Langworthy. So we'll see again how that shapes up as well. That's it from here from the Irish Center in South Buffalo. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Andy Payton, who is in downtown Buffalo with the Republicans. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Unfortunately, no pizza here, but things are starting to fill up. We see some folks starting to gather in, and excitement is still high here, despite Democrats outnumbering Republicans in this state 2-1. And there's a number of elections that they're keeping an eye on all across the ballot, specifically the state Senate race, the 61st district there, and the 142nd Assembly District. I'm told that this is going to be one that we really want to watch today and could be a marquee matchup. That includes West Seneca, parts of Buffalo, Lackawanna, Orchard Park. The incumbent Patrick Burke has been there for 4 years now, but Sandy Magnano, a registered nurse of 40 years, is the Republican challenger. And a big reason that this could be a close one, as the GOP chair tells me, is that Burke is just what they feel out of touch with the community. So we'll keep you updated on this one to see if it shakes out the way they think it does as the night goes on. Back to you, Scott and Mary Alice.
You got it, Andy. Thank you. And of course, the biggest race across New York State is for the next governor. Incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul hopes to become the first woman to be elected to the job, while Republican challenger Congressman Lee Zeldin says it's time for a change in Albany.
Another big race is for the state attorney general. Letitia James is facing off against Michael Henry. Now, some of the biggest issues voters considered at the polls include bail reform, gun laws, abortion, and much more. Now, we should start to get a clear picture in those races as polls close at the top of the hour and counties across New York start reporting numbers.
In the next half hour, we're going to hear from 2 on Your Side's Claudine Ewing and Rob Hackford, who are both in New York City with Hochul and Zeldin watch parties. But right now, our local coverage continues on Channel 2.2 and streaming on WGRZ+.
We've got some great analysis coming up. Make sure you check it out. We'll see you back here in just 30 minutes for another 2 on Your Side election update.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on your side.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us this special Decision 2022 webcast. I'm Dave McKinley here at 2 on your side. We take you through a critical night for the future of our state and our country. Joining us and you as the polls close here in New York State. Over the next 2 hours, you can watch those results updated at the bottom of your screen. We'll be getting live updates as the only local station to send reporters to cover that all-important governor's race in New York City, where the candidates are watching tonight, and from here in Western New York on the key local races. We'll also be helping put some perspective to those results with the analysts right here in our studio, Jessica Schuster, Democratic Party, and Carl Calabrese, representing the Republican Party. Good of you to stop by tonight. So much to talk about.
Thanks for having us.
Where shall we begin? How about nationally? Congress, the control of which is up for grabs. Not unusual for the party which holds the presidency to lose some seats in a midterm after a new president is installed. But will it be enough to tip the scale of control? Let's begin with the House. Republicans only need to flip 5 seats. Will they do it? Start with you, Carl.
Yes, they will do it. The average loss for a president facing his first midterm since World War II has been 28 seats. Since Ronald Reagan, it's been 42 seats. So given the history, given the fact that 31 Democrats retired, that's a record number. About half of them retired from districts that Biden won by 3 points or less, so now they're an open seat. I think that plus the foul mood that the country is in, inflation, all of the issues, yeah, they're going to tip the balance in the House.
By that much, Jess?
You know, I think the margins will maybe closer than we're predicting, but I do agree with Carl. I think that certainly all of the predictions and all the betting markets have said, long-standing, that Democrats probably will lose control of the House. I think that, you know, depending on whether or not this red wave materializes, we may see a closer race or a closer House than we previously expected, but I do suspect that Democrats will probably lose control of the House, which means, you know, the speakership and all of the committees that come with that. So.
Oh, right. And now, just quickly, in the Senate, it's 50-50 now. Democrats do enjoy a majority more or less by dint of Vice President Harris, who has the tie-breaking vote as the president of the Senate. How close is that going to be? Because a lot of the pundits say it's going to be whoever has control is not going to be by much.
I don't think we will know tonight control of the Senate. I do think Georgia will go to a runoff.
Okay.
So I think that we will be waiting again on probably that state. And so I think that we will be left mostly the way that we started this, which is a 50-50 Senate with the vice president breaking the tie. It has just been way too close to call in so many close races. You're seeing Tim Ryan being very competitive in Ohio. The Fetterman-Oz race has been very competitive. I think the Warnock Senate race is actually the most expensive in history, given what they have spent in the media markets in Georgia. So I just think that we are really going to leave. We may trade seats. Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada may be an incumbent that we lose. But I do think that we are going to see a deadlocked Senate with the tie-breaking vote going to the vice president.
What do you think?
I think Republicans pick up 2 seats. It's true that races are very, very tight, but when you look at the trends since Labor Day, all of the Republican candidates who are now either tied slightly ahead or if they're behind within the margin of error have closed really big gaps from September, where many of them were down 8, 9, 10 points. They're now down 1 point, they're up 1 point. So in polling, the trend is very, very important, and that trend has been going red since Labor Day. So I think when it's all said and done, and I agree with Jess that some of these races aren't going to be decided tonight. When it's all settled in, I think Republicans will pick up 2 and control the Senate as well.
You know, I'll say nationally, one of the things that surprised even me was some of the exit polling out of Pennsylvania. And I did not suspect that abortion would rank so high. An issue that is, you know, very salient in the control of the Senate. It was the #1 ranking issue in some of the exit polling that we saw out of Pennsylvania, which would lead me to believe that perhaps that is an issue that while we saw some hemorrhaging in the polls, maybe around Labor Day, maybe Democrats are coming home and are voting on the issues.
If you know, is it codified in Pennsylvania as it is in New York, where Democrats made a big issue of it, and others were saying, why are you making a big issue of that? It's codified, nothing's going to change. Do you know about Pennsylvania?
I don't believe it's codified.
I don't know either.
I don't believe it is. I don't know for sure.
But the exit polls I've been seeing is that upwards of 75% of people are identifying the economy as the #1 issue. And so that really bodes well for Republican candidates.
All right. The Associated Press, and no big surprise, has called its first race of the evening the re-election of Senator Schumer. Now, the Senate majority has big implications for New York State, I would think, because he is the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. He holds a lot of power and the ability to bring home a lot of bacon for New York State. So this is the control of the Senate is really a big matter for New York State as a whole. Wouldn't you both agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think the control of the Senate matters for everyone, for the entire country, frankly. We saw Senator Chuck Schumer, you know, he was the person who seemed to be the mansion whisperer, right? When we were talking about big generational infrastructure deals that he ended up getting across the finish line when it didn't seem like other members of the Senate were able to do that. I think having someone like Chuck Schumer as our senator certainly benefits this state, and the majority leader of the Senate obviously has power, as you mentioned, David, that you know, other members, more junior members, just don't.
It is true. You can bring home the bacon, but the problem is the bacon is all being financed by debt, which is now up to $31 trillion. Eventually, that's going to be a problem. The other issue with the Senate, though, and I think this is critical, is you've got 2 Supreme Court justices now in their 70s. If there's a vacancy in the Supreme Court in the next couple of years, who controls the Senate is going to be critical.
Yeah. Don't bring home the bacon, bring home the sizzling, as they used to say years ago. Well, the next big race we're going to talk about is, of course, for New York State Governor. But while we're on that subject, let's go to live to New York City. Channel 2 is the only station to send reporters to the campaign headquarters tonight for both Kathy Hochul, Claudine Ewing is covering tonight, Manhattan, and Rob Hackford is with the Zeldin campaign, and he is ready to join us live from Gotham.
Yeah, Dave, from our perch here at the Zeldin Esposito campaign headquarters here in Midtown Manhattan, the crowd has really filled in significantly over the past hour, and spirits are pretty high here. We have not received any indication about early results or any of the early voting numbers that may be coming in at this point from the Zeldin campaign, but drinks are being poured, hors d'oeuvres are being served, people are enjoying themselves here. We've seen plenty of well-known New York Republicans here as well. Andrew Giuliani, the former gubernatorial candidate, actually ran against Zeldin in the primary, is here. He lost in that race, but is supporting him here tonight. And again, we've received no early indications about where things are headed with this race, but heading in with polling, we knew the numbers were close. We spoke with Congressman Zeldin earlier today. His spirits were high as he saw some early numbers and had some earlier conversations with individuals in the Bronx and elsewhere around New York City, where he seems to think that he can edge out some votes from Governor Kathy Hochul, where she's hoping that New York City is a stronghold of Democrats and individuals that will support her. Again, as we get those early voting results, we'll have our first indicators of where this race could be headed. But certainly spirits are high here in Midtown Manhattan. We're going to have much more tonight, and hopefully speaking with a few of those well-known Republican members around New York State as they continue to trickle in. No words of who else may be showing up tonight to support Congressman Zeldin, as he hopes to become the first Republican to win a statewide race in New York in more than 2 decades. I'm going to send it over to my colleague Claudine Ewing, though. She is down in Chinatown with the Hochul campaign right now. And Claudine, how are things looking in that camp as well? Dave McKinley will send it back to the studio. Dave, thanks again.
All right. Well, we were just talking about Chuck Schumer. He was the first declared winner of the night by the Associated Press. We talked about his lofty position as the Senate Majority Leader and how important that may be to New York State in particular. Senator Schumer, besides being the first to be declared a winner, is also the first talking about it tonight in New York.
In Genesee County to the Farmers Market in Union Square, learning from everyday New Yorkers about their difficulties and their dreams, and then going to D.C. to do something about it. That's just who I am, and I ain't changing now. I want to recognize my friends and partners in government tonight. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, my great partner in the Senate. Governor Kathy Hochul. Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado. Attorney General Tish James. Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie and Mayor Eric Adams and the good many state senators, assembly members, and city council members all here to celebrate with us tonight. And God willing, we'll soon be celebrating many more great victories up and down this ticket tonight. My friends, I love this job. I love my job representing all 20 million New Yorkers in all our diversity and energy and eccentricity as the first ever majority leader from this state. And I take very seriously my responsibility to make this community I love a better place. That's why, remember how they always used to say New York gave more money to Washington than we got back? Well, that's why I'm proud to say that under my leadership, for the first time in memory, our state got more money back from the federal government than we sent down.
That is Senator Chuck Schumer speaking after his reelection is called by the Associated Press already tonight on this Decision 2022. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back after this.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on your side.
Good evening and welcome back. Well, it didn't start out this way, but in the eyes of some, specifically the pollsters, it became a horse race in the New York State governor's race. Incumbent Kathy Hochul enjoys a significant edge in enrollment among enrolled members of the Democratic Party. None of the polls really ever showed Lee Zeldin leading Kathy Hochul by any amount other than within a statistical dead heat. And those are just a couple of them. But most showed a trend favorable to Zeldin in terms of getting closer toward Election Day. Before we ask our analysts if that will be enough to keep us counting late into the night, we can tell you someone is already counting the votes coming in. That is Michael Wooten, deftly working the whiteboard tonight. Michael.
Hey, Dave, your timing is really impeccable because literally about 20 seconds ago, we got some local results in for the governor's race. I'm going to take you kind of on a tour across the state with this kind of caveat off the very top. Everything we're showing you right now is believed to be almost 100% early vote during that 8-day period, and in some cases also the absentee mail-in ballots that were received as of a couple of days ago. Absentee ballots that are received after that, after the early voting period is ended, those won't be opened for a week or more depending on the types of ballots. So keep all of that in mind. As I was just reminded by Jessica a moment ago, there very well could be this kind of blue mirage here in New York State. You anticipate Democrats are going to be more likely to vote early, more likely to vote by mail. But with all of that said, here's where we go. We just got some Suffolk County results in too, so I'll get to that. But I'm going to start with New York City. This is where so many of the votes are in New York State. There are questions about turnout down in the Big Apple. This is the borough of Queens. This is showing 48% of the vote in. Something to keep in mind as you see these totals now. Because so many more people are voting by mail and also with the early voting, these are estimates of the total vote that is in. It used to be with 48% of the precincts reporting. That's not what we're talking about now because very little of this is day of votes, right? So we think this is about half of the vote in. That might be exaggerating it a little bit. But the margins here is what you really want to look at. Governor Hochul anticipated to win in the New York City boroughs except Staten Island. But 69-31 is a healthy margin. If we go back 2 years ago to the presidential race, it's the last time we had a statewide race. The margin between President Biden and President Trump, 72-27. So Lee Zeldin doing a little bit better, needs to do a lot better, and that very well may be the case once we factor in the votes from today. Again, we believe most of this, if not all of it, early voting and mail-in voting. All right, so that's Queens. We'll go up to the Bronx. All right, this is 100%. I'm sorry, we're on the 2020 numbers. Let's go back to the governor's race now. So Bronx is saying 65% of the vote in. If that's accurate, it's a huge chunk of votes. I don't think it is because we're looking at 50,000 and 11,000. But right now the margin's healthy, 81-19. We'll go into Manhattan, and here you can see 85-15. This is saying 70% of the vote in. So I think those vote totals are a little bit exaggerated, but this does give you a sense of where the margins are in terms of the early vote. So you have to imagine the Hochul campaign is pretty happy with that. I want to zoom out and go more to our region. Chautauqua County is the one county we have in now. They said by 9:15 they expected to have the early and mail-in vote in, and they met the deadline. You can see 5,000 votes for Kathy Hochul, a little over 4,000 for Lee Zeldin, so 55-45. It's anticipated Lee Zeldin will win this county when we factor in the day of votes, but this is the early voting and the mail-in voting only, about 9,000 votes total, and there Kathy Hochul with a 10-point. We just heard from Chuck Schumer. He won the race, already called based on exit polling and the little bit of vote we had. And in that case, if you look in Chautauqua County, the margins were almost the same. Kathy Hochul doing almost as well as Chuck Schumer in Chautauqua County. So if she can do that statewide, it's going to be an early night. The Zeldin campaign will tell you not so fast. They don't think that's what's going to happen. So these are the early numbers in Chautauqua County. None of our other Western New York counties have put anything in yet. But the other thing I want to show you is Suffolk County. This is the home to Lee Zeldin, where he's expected to do very well. Very little vote in here, 284 votes to 220. So this would be just a small fraction of either a little bit of day of vote that they're going ahead and putting out or a little bit of the early vote. We don't know that exactly right now. But Suffolk County is a place where we want to keep an eye on throughout the night. I wonder, Dave, as I toss it back to you guys, what do we make of this fact? And it's one example, and it's early votes. So you imagine it's a lot of Democrats. But the fact that Hochul is doing pretty much on par with Schumer, is that something to factor in as we kind of process all this?
It might be, Michael. Last time, of course, a Republican won election to the state's highest office. It was 20 years ago. George Pataki won a third term. In fact, he was the last Republican to ever win a statewide office of any kind. While the enrollment edge for Democrats, as we talked about statewide, is of significance, it's even more so in New York City. In 1994, when George Pataki defeated Mario Cuomo for his first term, he got 27% of the vote in New York City. Would Lee Zeldin need as much or more?
I think he's going to need more. I think the number to look for in New York City is at least 30%, more like 33 to 35%. So if he's not hitting that threshold, that's major problems. And remember, when George Pataki won, there were 1 million more Democrats than Republicans in New York. There's today 3.5 million more Democrats. So it is a tough hill to climb. There's no question. But that's the number to look for in New York City.
Sure is. And what are your insights on that, Jessica, as we have just about a minute before we have to go to break?
I think a couple things. I would say that one of the things I think is a misnomer is talking about party enrollment as compared to party identification. So we have people who are enrolled in parties that perhaps they registered as when they were 18 and felt differently, and as they age may not actually perform or vote as Democrats. So I think it's important to sort of talk about party identification and what that means for New York State. I also agree with Carl. I think 35%. Zeldin needs to hit 35% to have a chance statewide in this race.
All right. From what we're seeing so far, Michael alluded to this a bit, but do you think it's going to be enough to keep us counting late into the night, either of you?
I'll know after I see more numbers from New York City. If those New York City numbers come in and he's at 20%, 25%, we won't be here late.
I think there's some bellwether counties we can look at, right? Erie County is certainly one of them. Onondaga, Westchester, Suffolk, and Nassau counties. There's some other places we can look to see what we anticipate seeing down the road. Early voting often tells us who is voting. So that's a really good indication of what we'd expect to see elsewhere, looking at those numbers, which we already have in many cases.
I mean, Erie County's got 136,000 more Democrats than Republicans, and I'm going to watch to see how she performs against that number, and that'll be a good indicator, I think, in terms of her strength in areas outside of New York City.
If you talk to people who've been involved in politics for any length of time, they will often remind you that when it comes to governor's races, as Erie County goes, so goes the county. You said it, Jessica, a bellwether county, at least over modern history.
I think what I usually say is that Erie County is a good microcosm for the state as a whole, and also the country. I mean, we have a dense urban core. We have, sort of swingy inner ring and second ring suburbs, and then we have rural areas that, vote in every election. So it often is kind of a good bellwether for many races, predictably.
I was with former Congressman Tom Reynolds last night, and his rule of thumb has always been, as Cheektowaga goes, so goes the nation.
We'll talk more about that when we return. You're watching Decision 2022.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on Your Side.
Thanks for joining 2 on Your Side on air and streaming right now on WGRZ+. Polls across New York State are now closed. Good evening, I'm Mary Alice Demler.
And hello everyone, I'm Scott Levin. We are now starting to get a look at the numbers now as counties across the state report their voting totals.
Well, here is a look at where the governor's race stands at this hour. Right now, we have about 27% of the precincts reporting. Kathy Hochul's 70% to Lee Zeldin's 30%.
And the 2 on Your Side team is live tonight. We are in New York City. Let's head right now to Claudine Ewing live at Kathy Hochul's campaign headquarters. Claudine?
Scott and Mary Alice, right now it is a party, but so far we've heard from Kristen Gillibrand when we spoke with her on the side, but we also heard from Senator Charles Schumer. He took the stage and he was declaring victory. He's also thinking that this is going to be a good night for the Democrats. As you can see and hear, the music is pumping loud. The people are excited. What we've been told, because remember, we are in New York City, that this is likely the second largest turnout for a gubernatorial race in New York City. And they say right now it looks to favor Kathy Hochul. Of course, this is all information coming from the Hochul camp that's happening here tonight. We are expected to also hear from other state leaders, including the State Attorney General, Letitia James, and other state leaders, including the Comptroller. But of course, here it's all about Kathy Hochul. The people want to see her, they want to hear from her. And if you look behind me and you hear the crowd behind me, they think it's going to be a victory, but we all know it's about the numbers and what those numbers say and when they come in and what it comes out to be. We'll send it back inside to you in Buffalo.
All right, Claudine, let's send it out to Rob Hackford now. He's also in Midtown Manhattan right now covering Lee Zeldin. Rob?
Yeah, Scott, from our perch here at the Zeldin Esposito headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, just across the street from Grand Central Station, actually. The crowd is certainly filled in. Spirits are high here tonight, but we have really not heard any indication from the Zeldin camp of where things may be headed. A few big Republicans that have been milling about. We did speak to Andrew Giuliani, the former gubernatorial candidate for governor, who's now stumping for Congressman Zeldin. Speaking to him briefly, he is looking at New York City as an indicator for where this race could be headed this evening. He's eyeing 37 or 38% of voters in New York City in support of Congressman Zeldin as a key to potentially winning the congressman this race and being the first Republican in 20 years to flip a statewide seat for a Republican. We received, again, no early indications of where these voter turnouts are heading, but as they continue to trickle in, we'll be speaking with more individuals, more party leaders to get a better indication of things, but also breaking down those early voting totals. Where are they high? Where are they low? We've already heard, as Claudine reported earlier, that Erie County was looking to have lower turnout, but the state overall was having higher turnout. Those could play some key differences and make some big key impacts in where this race could be headed and whether this race can be won by Congressman Zeldin. Of course, Kathy Hochul is the only individual standing her way at this point. But for now in Midtown Manhattan, I'm going to send it back to Scott and Mary Ellis.
All right, Rob, thank you very much. And Claudine Ewing, our 2 reporters from Western New York that are in New York City. We appreciate that. And of course, we will continue to keep a very close eye on these numbers for you and bring you updates and races across the state and throughout the night.
Just flip over to channel 2.2 or head to WGRZ.com and the WGRZ Plus. We'll see you in a half hour.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on Your Side.
Good evening. Welcome back. I'm Dave McKinley, along with our analysts tonight, Jessica Schuster and Carl Calabrese. Jessica, you were making a point before our break about Erie County being the bellwether county. As you talk to longtime pals, they'll tell you, so goes Erie County, so goes the state. And you were making a very good point, I thought, because It's a nice microcosm, a slice of New York, if you will. We're not New York City, decidedly urban and decidedly Democratic. We are not Orleans County, decidedly rural and decidedly red. We do have a major city. We have suburbs. We have our rural area, too.
3 cities.
Yeah.
Lackawanna, Tonawanda, Buffalo.
And a big one in Buffalo, right. So the exception, of course, to this more recently, 2010, where Carl Palladino won Erie County but lost to Andrew Cuomo in the race for governor. Of course, he was from here. He maybe has some favorite son status, if you will. Here we find Kathy Hochul with favorite daughter status and an enrollment edge. So the question before we get to some of the results that may be coming in from Erie County very soon, if you think because of those things, she wins big here, and by how much?
I think she'll probably win Erie County. Again, I'm going to be looking to see how she performs against that enrollment number of 136,000. This is anecdotal, but an awful lot of people have said to me, Kathy Hochul may have been homegrown, but she's not the same Kathy Hochul we saw as a councilwoman in Hamburg, a county clerk, and as a member of Congress. She has moved decidedly to the left. It'll be interesting to see how that plays, and especially those second and third ring suburbs in the rural areas of Erie County. I don't think it plays well, but we'll see.
So I think, in terms of what we're looking for out of Kathy Hochul tonight, 55% in Erie County would be a great number for her to hit. I also think that, you're talking about anecdotal evidence, Carl. You, David, and I all know that Republicans win here countywide. I mean, it happens. We elect Republicans, and so I think when we talk about this Democratic enrollment advantage, again, and I know I made this point before, but it is about how people identify and not how they are necessarily enrolled. Our countywide races here are competitive nearly every single year. So to talk about Kathy Hochul in terms of underperformance or overperformance, I did some digging into the 2018 election, and Andrew Cuomo carried Erie County with 51.4% of the vote. So Kathy Hochul is underperforming as compared to what? I think that Erie County tends to be a more moderate county, even with this Democratic enrollment advantage. So I think if we see Kathy getting to 55% in Erie County, Democrats everywhere should be very happy with that number.
Erie County has a lot of what used to be called Reagan Democrats, blue-collar Democrats who may be still registered Democrat, I agree with Jess, but have kind of left the party psychologically and ideologically, and that's what makes it an interesting county, and that's why Republicans can win when they tap into that type of voter. I don't know if Kathy Hochul has done that, but again, I think Erie County will come in for her. New York City is going to be the key, though. I mean, I don't care how you cut it. It is the driving force in state politics, and will be tonight.
Or the tail that wags the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're hearing...
Pretty big tail, though.
Yeah.
It's an awful big tail.
There's a lot of meat near the tail, as I used to tell my son when he was playing with Barney, the dinosaur. A lot of good meat near the tail. Well, listen, we do know that he's maybe so far gotten about 27% of the vote in New York City. That is something that George Pataki was able to win with. We had talked earlier that he would need a lot more than that. But speaking of numbers, we have some more. We're going to be joined now live by Michael Wooten, and he's got an update for us tonight.
Yeah, I think it might surprise people when you look at this map right now, and I know it's zoomed out showing the entire state. The top line number, 6931. Again, this is because a lot of the early vote is in and a lot of the mail votes have been counted. I say a lot. There are a lot of counties here that have reported nothing, but Erie County's full early vote is in, some of it down on Long Island, a tiny little bit of it, a lot in New York City as well. But right now, if you zero in on our region, all 4 of our counties are a shade of blue right now, and that's because Hochul's up in all of them. These are all, maybe with a little bit of exception, early vote and mail-in absentee. So take this all with a grain of salt. But you can see Cattaraugus County will start. Kathy Hochul up 10 points. Not huge turnout with early voting. We're looking at, what, a little over 3,000 votes there. We'll go to Chautauqua County. We mentioned this one before. This has tightened up a little bit, so there are some day of votes that have been added into the early votes in Chautauqua County. They're notoriously fast in Chautauqua County compared to most of our region. So we're going to get these numbers in, I think, pretty quickly out of that county. Expect Lee Zeldin to take the lead there, I would say, pretty soon. Erie County is where now we have, again, all of the early vote in, all of the mail vote in, and it's 62-38. You would expect that Kathy Hochul will do very well with the mail votes because it's just way more popular with Democratic voters. Democratic voters also tend to like early voting more. So we'll see how much this gap can narrow as we bring in the day of vote. But, right now, 57,000 votes for Kathy Hochul, 35,000 for Lee Zeldin. A lot of day of vote to count there. And then we'll end to Niagara County, where, again, it's a 10-point spread with Kathy Hochul looking just at those early votes. Zoom back out here, and I want to show you New York City, because Carl, I'm interested to get your take on this, and if you think this is worrisome for the Republican candidate right now. So this is almost entirely early vote. It is all of the early vote, and it's also now a lot of day of vote. So you're looking at 240,000 votes total out of, this is Manhattan, New York County, and it's 84-16. It is a massive spread right now for Kathy Hochul, right? So here's what I want to do. I want to draw here. We're looking total votes, 240,000 right now that is in, right? If we go back now, 2 years ago, this is the presidential race. A lot more interest in a presidential year, a lot more people go out and vote. But if we add those two up, it's almost 700,000. So let's say we get half the turnout for this election than we did 2 years ago in a place like Manhattan. I think that's ballpark what people may think. That means, we still got another 100,000 votes to count. Maybe Lee Zeldin can shrink the difference there, but with a margin, if we go back, this is the governor's race for this year. The margin right now, 84-16. That is not a margin that Lee Zeldin's campaign believes can help them win statewide. Dave?
All right, Michael, thank you very much. And he said he was interested in your take on it, so let's please him with that.
If Michael's assumptions are correct, I think they're reasonable assumptions about turnout. It looks like he's not going to get to that number of 35% or a few percentage points more, and that will be a huge anchor to take out of New York City and try to overcome in the rest of the state.
We talked a little bit about how these are a lot of the early votes. And initially, early voting, we've only had it for a couple of years, but initially the bastion of the Democrats by and large. Republicans generally staunch in their preference early on in the first few years to go to the polls on Election Day. I had wondered, though, if by this year they might be warming to the idea more, the Republicans, and that it's surprising to still be saying, overwhelmingly Democrat on the early. Maybe it'll just take some time. What do you think?
So 2019 was the first year in Erie County that we had the early voting, and I think what we have seen is sort of an evolution that Republicans are warming to early voting. They still, however, do like to vote in person. So the mail vote is skewing even more Democratic, which is sort of a recent phenomenon in terms of historical preferences. But early voting does seem to be picking up appeal in Republican and more rural areas. We saw that in this early vote that we actually had all high likelihood voters, so people we would all expect to vote, but much of the Republican vote, much more of it was in than in past years prior to Election Day. What that means is Republicans are catching on. They're liking early voting. Anecdotally, I heard Marjorie Taylor Greene promoting early voting on a Showtime show that I watch regularly. And so I was surprised. It does seem like Republicans are pivoting. They are preferring early voting, or at least to mail-in voting, but they do like to vote in person. That's clear.
No question. Republicans have yet to really warm up to early voting, but they're starting. Republicans by nature are a little more conservative than Democrats, and they like things the way they were, and it takes a little longer to work new ideas and new procedures in. But I think it's starting to happen. I've talked to a lot of Republicans, and they are warming up to it.
Okay, Michael has made some comparisons in his reports to us on the numbers, looking back at how President Trump did a couple of years ago, and comparing those numbers, how Lee Zeldin. Is it fair to compare Lee Zeldin to President Trump? I know that they tried to link him heartily to it, the Hochul campaign did. But when you're looking at numbers, I mean, is it an apples to apples comparison?
I think you're asking two different questions, Dave, if I can. I think, when you're comparing electoral data, no, I don't think it's fair to judge a midterm cycle by presidential outcome. We just don't see the same kind of enthusiasm to vote on the part of the voters. Now, I think it's a more subjective question whether it's fair to link Lee Zeldin and Donald Trump. I would say absolutely. Lee Zeldin was, right there defending Donald Trump early, actually, in his campaign. So in terms of content and candidacy and politics, yes. I don't know that it's the best analogy to make when you're talking about presidential year turnout in terms of what we're actually looking for in this race. A better use would be probably the gubernatorial race in 2018, which was Mark Molinaro and Governor Cuomo. I think that gives us more sort of comparison to talk about.
Yeah, presidential races are a unique phenomenon. You get a spike in voters. There are voters who only vote once every 4 years in presidential races, and you see that spike. So you can't compare a presidential race to a midterm race. They're just different creatures. They bring out different people. Donald Trump was a phenomenon, a political phenomenon. Whether or not he can repeat it has yet to be seen. But no, I would not even attempt to compare the two, presidential race versus a midterm race.
Sure. We've got a moment to talk about the balance of power in the legislature. Democrats went from getting a real foothold about 10 years ago to now where they have supermajorities in the Senate and the Assembly. And that stands probably to stay. But one race locally through redistricting, we did have incumbents Sean Ryan and Ed Rath within the same district. Enrollment edge to Sean Ryan and privately Republican sources telling me they expect that Ed Rath is going to have to be finding a new job soon.
I think they're right on. I mean, I just know from voter turnout earlier in the day that it appeared the places that voters were turning out would be very favorable to Senator Ryan. So I think that we will see Sean Ryan remain a state senator, and we will see probably Senator Rath finding somewhere else to work in January.
I thought from the beginning that if there was a real red wave nationwide and that red wave breached New York's blue wall, so to speak, that would deliver Ed Rath. If it did not happen, if that red wave did not breach New York State, that Ryan would be the favorite going in tonight. As of now, it does not look like any red wave in the nation will breach New York's blue walls.
Oh, right. Speaking of a little of the red, we go now to Ron Plants. He's at Republican headquarters downtown.
Yeah, hi, Dave. Hi, Dave, here at the Buffalo Irish Center. Obviously, the crowd has picked up with the music playing and all the activity taking place in the background here. We have been just checking with some of the party officials, especially at the town level, as they've been coming in, just to get an idea from them. They're not up for election, obviously, but they are giving us some idea as to what they were seeing with turnout. I spoke to Amherst Town Supervisor Brian Colpa. That is a big part of that 61st State Senate district that Sean Ryan is in, up against Republican Ed Rath, the two incumbents. That's kind of what we've been keying on. And Colpa was telling me that they actually had people standing in line outside the polling stations in the town of Amherst, which is big in that state Senate race. Also just spoke to Pat Burke, and he is in a hotly contested race, it would seem. I have to be honest with you, with redistricting, I think he was in the 143rd Assembly District. Not quite sure now, but he told me he's been moved up more so into the West Seneca area, so he does not have parts of Orchard Park that he had before. As such, he is seeing that the Republicans poured a lot of money into that race for his opponent against him. So he says he is aware that there is quite an amount of excitement, which shall we say, on the part of the Republicans in this race, and he is watching this closely just to see if he will be going back to Albany. One other thing we'll just point out, Dave, again, it's very interesting with the congressional districts as they were redrawn. We noticed that there is a couple of crews here from Elmira, and that would be because of the 23rd Congressional District with Democrat Max Delapia and Republican Nick Langworthy, who are running against each other for that newly redrawn district. So that just gives you some of the flavor that we're seeing here. Not too many other candidates besides Pat Burke. We've seen a couple judicial candidates, but that's the scene here from the Democratic headquarters at the Irish Center in South Buffalo. So I'll send it back to you for more analysis, unless you have any questions for me.
Appreciate that insight that you have for us, Ron. I do have a question, though, for our next guest. It's about the 142nd Assembly race. Incumbent Patrick Burke, the Democrat, against the Republican challenger, Sandy Magnano. And joining us now as well from our news gathering partners at the Investigative Post. Good evening, Jeff.
Hello, Dave. How are you?
Good to have you along. This 142nd could have been close, and depends who you ask, but there was some word, and we even heard from Andy Payton that at the Republican headquarters that they thought this was going to be a close one.
Yeah, it's a district where enrollment should favor the Democratic incumbent, Pat Burke, but there are a great number of unaffiliated voters, which sort of balances things out. And it's clear that state Republicans smelled blood in the water. They smelled an opportunity because they sent a fair amount of money and resources to Sandy Magnano. I know from Burke's camp that they were concerned as well, and still are. Right now, early going still, just about a little over a third of the vote in, election day vote in, and Burke has a bit of a lead, but it's mostly on the strength of early voting, which is not unusual for Democrats.
All right. Jeff Kelly, thank you very much. And I'll just get your thoughts on that race as well, as long as I have you both.
Yeah, you know, Burke, I think, was a little nervous. You could see that by his advertising because he had an aggressive challenger and she was well funded. And normally you don't see that in races against incumbent assembly members. But we saw it this time, and Republicans were very hopeful that they could do an upset here and defeat an incumbent. So we'll have to see, but it certainly was an aggressive race on the part of the Republican challenger and a well-funded race.
You were talking a bit about this before we even hit air tonight, Jessica, and some things that you could share with us.
I was. So I think that, you know, maybe it is a little bit lost on the general public who are not like the three of us, but that these assembly races have seen huge ad buys and massive spending from Albany on both sides of the aisle. This particular race was the only RAC-funded opponent, that is the Republican Assembly Campaign Committee. So that's basically Albany Republican money that is coming to seats where they deem the incumbent vulnerable. So Pat was seeing early ads from Sandy Magnano. I think she's been on since September at least. And so, you know, it was quite a fight. I think that Pat is a strong incumbent. I disagree that I've heard it said that he does not reflect his district. I think that's false, but it does take money and resources to get your message out there. And so I think we saw that. I think we saw over the past 2 weeks that ads were, you know, one right after the other, and these assembly races really matter. You know, bringing home the money for the districts in the Western New York area has been a huge benefit to all of us. And so I think Pat and his team have fought hard. I suspect that they will be okay tonight, but certainly I'm sure they were nervous, and they worked like they were. So kudos to them.
Frankly, I think a lot of Democrat incumbent assembly members were nervous because of this so-called red wave around the country. And I think even though they might be looking good in their polls, they still decided to do advertising and to be aggressive to make sure they were inoculated against any red wave and just to give themselves that extra level of protection. So that's how I interpreted a lot of the ads I saw for Democrat incumbents who have won in the past, won comfortably, and then all of a sudden they're on TV. It's because they were nervous and running to make sure they had a little insurance policy.
Earlier tonight, you appeared on one of the early shows, a little segment called Two Things to Watch. You both talked about turnout. And that was, and I wanted to ask you, I mean, was it turnout or messaging that was more important? It's turnout?
Well, it's both. I mean, if you have good messaging, you can motivate your voters and they then in turn turn out. Okay, but every election is about turnout, and the problem with polls is that they can't predict turnout. Okay, they tell you what people are thinking at that moment, but what the model is going to be in terms of the turnout model, you don't know that until election night. You can project it, you can anticipate it, but you can't poll for it. And so it's all about turnout, and it's all about that. Kind of the unsexy part of politics, the grassroots stuff, the phone calls, the volunteers, the door-to-door, the mailing, you know, the social media advertising, all of that stuff that's under the radar screen, that's what produces turnout. But message is a major part of getting your voters motivated to come out.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I always say when I make an analogy that campaigns are sort of like a bunch of grapes. And so you can have a lot of little things that work together that make one whole bunch. And when you start to lose a few here and there, that's when it starts to not look like a bunch of grapes anymore. And that's where campaigns fall apart. I think that your question about messaging, Dave, is a good one. And I think that it is clear that Republicans are better at messaging in many ways, but that's about all they're better at. So
I would disagree.
They have really abdicated. I think they've really abdicated all policy positions. And so in many of these cases, including these Democratic incumbent assembly members, these people are busy also doing the work of governing. So they're fighting kind of a two-pronged battle, right? They're caught a little bit on their heels just by the nature of being an incumbent. They're also working on governing, and then they're also out politicking. I think that, messaging is important, but in an era where we see so much nationalization, there really is a very small amount of sort of gettable swing voters. And so probably turnout matters to both camps more than it has in the past, because we just expect, the top of the ticket to sort of draw voters out, and then they vote in line. There's very little ticket splitting anymore that happens in politics.
One of the problems in New York State for Republicans is that we're in the minority. And when you're in the minority, guess what? You cannot raise the kind of money an incumbent does. And that's why Democrats are so effective in getting their message out, because they usually outspend the Republican opponent 5, 6, 10 to 1. That's the advantage of incumbency, the ability to raise lots of money early and not only get your message out during the campaign, but by raising a lot of money early, you oftentimes scare away A-list candidates from the other side, because they look at your bank total and they say, I can't compete with that financially. I'm going to pass. So that's the advantage of incumbency,
especially in the state legislature.
No question.
Incumbents almost always win unless they decide it's time to do something else.
There's an old saying, a few die and none retire. Okay, and that applies to a lot of legislative bodies.
There's just one time enough just to talk about one county-wide race. County clerk, incumbent Mickey Kearns, Democrat Melissa Harbin. Any thoughts there?
I think this was a unique race in many ways. Certainly, we all heard the rhetoric. There was a registered Democrat running as a Republican,
right,
and a former Republican turned Democrat running as the endorsed Democrat.
Yes.
I think in
Why
terms
not?
Only in Erie County. Only in Erie
we like
County.
to make it interesting, right, on election night. I think one thing is resoundingly clear from my perspective, and that is that I don't believe Mickey Kearns can any longer call himself a Democrat. We saw that resounding primary defeat. And so I think it is clear that the Democratic base no longer considers him one of theirs. Mm-hmm. In terms of what we will see with the vote, it is, given the 20 years of incumbent name recognition, the prominent public-facing office he holds, it's hard to predict anything like that, I think, in terms of raw data. But, that primary victory by Melissa Hartman was, I think, the big takeaway for me in that race, and I'll be anxious to see how the night pans out.
I don't know why Mickey Kearns is still a Democrat.
Well, hey, listen.
Yeah, he should become Republican.
Jimmy Griffin was a Democrat until Election Day, right? Until he ran for office.
But he's a guy who's been in office for a while. I think he works his incumbency well. He does a lot of constituent service, and having been an incumbent, I can tell you that is worth its weight in gold. That pays off mightily at election time. And he's got his own thing. He's got his own network, and that's why he's successful.
All right, numbers starting to come in more frequently, and we will be back with more. Stay with us.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on Your Side.
And welcome back. It is time for another 2 on Your Side election update. Thanks for joining us live on air and streaming on WGRZ+. I'm Scott Levin.
And I'm Mary Alice Dembler. Polls closed almost an hour ago, and as those long lines start to clear up, we are getting more numbers from counties across the state. Now, earlier this hour, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer declared victory over his Republican challenger, Joe Pinion. And with 31% of the precincts reporting, Schumer had 68% of the votes to Pinion's 31% and Diane Sayre's 0%.
And the biggest race for New Yorkers tonight, of course, is for the governor's office. Incumbent Kathy Hochul is hoping to be the first woman voted in as governor. And Republican challenger Congressman Lee Zeldin is hoping for an upset tonight. And with about a third of the vote in, Kathy Hochul has 65% to Lee Zeldin's 35%.
And we've got team coverage tonight on some other local elections. Let's send it to Andy Payton. He is at Erie County Republican headquarters. Andy?
Yeah, Scott and Mary Alice, you talk about calling elections. Just a few minutes ago, Nick Langworthy took the stage behind me here and called the election for himself with just 12% of the vote in, a very early claim to victory here in the 23rd Congressional District. Now, the thing about this is this district is very Republican, so he was a very heavy favorite in this one. He focused his campaign a ton on curbing inflation and lowering the cost of living, and a lot of folks thought this was going to happen after he defeated Carl Paladino back in August. But he did get up on the stage too and mention that for years he's worked behind the scenes and that now he just couldn't sit around anymore. He wanted to take charge and take on this role here, and he's promising that when he does take over here in the 23rd Congressional District, he'll be putting an emphasis on the southern tier and western New York in Albany. Reporting from the GOP headquarters, Andy Payton, Channel 2 News.
Right, Andy, thank you very much. We're getting more results now on the governor's race. Michael, what's the latest?
Yeah, so earlier, if you were watching our stream on WGRZ+, we showed you how in Erie County specifically, and that's what we've got pulled up right now in the governor's race, and we just got an update in the numbers. It looked very good for Kathy Hochul because it was early vote and it was mail vote, 100% of that in, and she was up big time. I've drawn on the map here. The mail vote, it was 70-30. Looking at the early vote, Hochul was up 64-36. What's happening now is more than half, 55% of the day of vote from Erie County has come in. And what's happened is Kathy Hochul is getting 46% of that compared to 54% for Lee Zeldin. So he is winning the day of vote by a pretty significant margin, and more people voted today, a lot more, than voted via mail or voted early. And so that's why we now have just a 6-point race, 53-47. Again, this is specifically in Erie County, but it is Kathy Hochul's home county. And it's a place where, a lot of people are paying close attention right now. So we'll get rid of this. One caveat to that, the Erie County places that are in right now with the day of vote, not a lot of city vote, not a lot of Tonawanda vote, Cheektowaga vote. So we could be seeing a blue mirage, then a red mirage, and then now another blue mirage. So still a lot of vote to count, almost half of it. But we will zoom out here and show you the entire state. This is where it's 65-35. Kathy Hochul doing, I think, better than some expected early on in New York City. That's what we'll be tracking very closely, guys, over the next little bit.
All righty. It continues to get more interesting. Thank you, Michael. And make sure you stick with 2 on Your Side this election night for continuing local coverage. Just flip over to Channel 2.2 and head to WGRZ.com and WGRZ+. We'll see you in 30 minutes.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on your side.
I'm David Kidley. Thanks for joining us again. And we're with Jessica Schuster and Carl Calabrese, our analysts for this Decision 2022. Just heard Michael Wooten talk about the latest numbers involving the governor's race and here in Erie County. Your thoughts as you heard that?
You know, I think we talked earlier, and I said 55% in Erie County would be a great number for Kathy Hochul. I think right now, as Michael told us, she was at about 53%, with a lot of the vote out in places where Democrats would expect to do well. That said, I know turnout was a concern. So much of the city of Buffalo is out, but if Buffalo is not turning out to vote, that could present somewhat of a problem for her. Other towns I know throughout the day, Amherst, Tonawanda, looking very good for Democrats, especially in the early vote. So I would suspect if there are large chunks of vote left out there, that those will go well for Kathy Hochul. You know, I think we said this before, but to act like there's some, I know there's an enrollment advantage, but really, I mean, this is a close race. I think the Hochul campaign treated it as such, and they took it very seriously. And so, you know, we will see at the end of the night, but 55% would be great for her.
Yeah, there's no question the Hochul campaign took this very seriously. In fact, my sources tell me that a week ago, there were some basically crisis meetings of top Democrats to figure out how to increase her vote in Western New York and other places in the state. But yeah, until we see the Buffalo vote, Tonawanda, Cheektowaga, you know, it's an unfinished story.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about the governor's race and talking about how George Pataki was the last Republican governor candidate to win. He won a third term 20 years ago. And you made the point of how many more Republicans there were in the state at the time. And I know you talked a lot about don't look at enrollment, look at how voters identify. But here again, Amherst, a classic example perhaps on how that's changed over the years. Amherst went for Mitt Romney over Barack Obama in 2012, 10 years ago, and then by 4 years later, it chose Hillary Clinton, and then by a substantial amount, maybe 6,000 votes, and then just 2 years ago, when it became the Trump-Biden race, Mr. Biden won in Amherst by about 16,000, I believe. So there's kind of an example about how over time things change.
When I was in town government, town of Tonawanda town government, I served on the town board for 15 years, half of that time as a councilman, and half of that time as a supervisor. We had 7 members of the town board, all Republican. Okay, today, all the members of the town board are Democrat. All the members of the Amherst Town Board, Cheektowaga Town Board are Democrat. The City of Buffalo City Council is all Democrat. So when you add up the population of Tonawanda, Amherst, Cheektowaga, and Buffalo, you've got over 2/3 of the county represented 100% at the local level by Democrats. That's how much the demographics and the political affiliation and the results at the polls, because of that political affiliation changing, has impacted the politics of those 4 communities.
I think Amherst is a story that Democrats like to talk about. No, I don't have the historical experience Carl does, but I can say that we saw that assembly seat swing from Ray Walter to Karen McMahon, one of the incumbents we're now talking about last night. That was back in 2018, and we have seen Democrats sweep the town board, like Carl said. So one of the reasons I think for that is that there's the most highly correlated factor that predicts voting outcomes or voting patterns is education. And of course, you see with the University of Buffalo being in Amherst, you see a highly educated population who is trending more and more Democratic as time goes on. So I think, and that certainly has been the same case in Tonawanda, given the proximity to universities. I think that's a pretty common, nationally speaking, not just in the state, that's a fairly common phenomena that we're all sort of starting to appreciate more and more.
But there's also a counterforce here. As more educated people are trending Democrat, you've got more working class people, blue collar people, minorities, especially Latinos, going the opposite way nationwide. That may not be the case in New York. It may take longer. If it is going to happen in New York, it may take longer to happen. But that's happening nationwide now.
One person who's been involved in politics for all of his adult life is Nick Langworthy, and he has got a big lead in the congressional race in the southern tier. We have, it looks like one of them, in fact, the race has been settled. Democrat Max Delapia, 38% to Nick Langworthy's 62%, a heavily red area. Langworthy also, we can tell you that the race has been conceded now. So it's Nick Langworthy on his way to Washington after the first of the year. Langworthy also spoke a short time ago at the local Erie County GOP event, saying he was headed for that big win tonight while thanking his opponent for a clean campaign.
Our children are watching us with every move we make. They're learning their values and what they'll bring to this country from us. Being a husband and a dad will always be the most important titles that I carry in this world. But I take the title of United States Representative for the 23rd District very, very seriously.
All right, Nick Langworthy on his way to Washington. Of course, he had to win a Republican primary first, and that one was kind of nasty, I guess.
Oh, that was more than nasty. It was nasty in capital letters. I mean, and what's really interesting is, I mean, these two men were friends. I mean, Carl Palladino was a huge supporter of the Republican Party when Nick was county chairman. Nick, helped his launch his campaign for governor, and then to see the acid that developed and poured over that friendship was really kind of disturbing for those of us on the Republican side that knew these two men, knew them as close friends, and to watch, in this case, what the political process did in that primary. It was as nasty as could be. The general election, though, with Mr. Dellapia was on a much different, much higher level. If you watch that debate, it was a good debate. It was two gentlemen debating policy differences, and so I think they both handled themselves very well.
Here in the year 2022, of all things.
Listen, Democrats love to see Republican primaries because we're used to fighting it out right in the open.
Right.
So from my perspective, Carl, it was very enjoyable, this New York 23 primary. And actually, Congressman-elect Langworthy will be my Congress member. I live in his district. But that said, I want to give Max Dellapia a big. I think Max is exactly the kind of candidate Democrats have been looking to run in these kinds of places. He's a veteran, former county chair, or I think he might still be the Tioga County chair, and a great guy. I've had the opportunity to meet him and get to know him, and I think he has a long career ahead of him in public service, and I hope he stays in the mix.
It's interesting. 2 years ago, when the Democrats, or I should say in 2020, when the Democrats, 2018, when the Democrats picked up 41 seats.
Yes.
That was the model candidate they went after. Veterans, a little more moderate, and it worked for them very, very well in 2018. It didn't work in this district, I think primarily because of the nature of the district. Yeah. But yeah, he was certainly a very high quality candidate, handled himself very well.
This is a new district too, don't forget, and I think that one of the things we just talked about was population. This area, this district, this New York 23 lost a lot of population. So one of the things we see is that when population kind of shifts, oftentimes those remaining will become even more extreme, which may explain some of the further right-leaning elements of the district. But certainly, I think that it was always expected that Nick Langworthy would probably take this race.
Sure. Even though, it was my understanding, there was some remorse among his own party about him taking on the campaign because as the state party chairman, they felt your job is to help the rest of us win races. And nothing against you running for Congress, but if that's your job, and we're trying to win, you got to lead us here and pick one or the other.
Oh no, there's no question. There was pushback from other parts of the state on that very issue. That you've got a gubernatorial campaign that should be 100% of your focus. And if he had lost this congressional race, you can bet there would have been a very serious challenge to his chairmanship if he decided to run again. That's a moot point now. He's going to be resigning his chairmanship. He's already announced that. But yeah, there was concern and there was pushback about it, and open criticism.
I don't typically find myself defending Nick Langworthy, but I will say that we talked earlier about Republicans being very marginalized in New York State, and so what power does a state chair have when they hold very little elected seats? There's not a lot of sway. So I personally don't blame Nick Langworthy. But, my say probably doesn't matter a whole lot to him.
All right. Well, we mentioned Max Dellapia, who has conceded the race. Let's hear from him now.
It's always important that we provide voters a choice, even when the odds are against us, because we're Democrats and we care about each other. The election results show many voters want their representative to be bipartisan and oriented toward public service rather than one committed to party and divisive partisanship and self-interest. Unfortunately, there were not enough of us. These elections results today we'll have...
All right, there he is, Max Delapia, giving it the try down there in the 23rd, heavily Republican district, conceding now to Nick Langworthy in what you described, Carl, as during the primary session among Republicans as nasty in capital letters, which I appreciate because that's as nasty as we can say on TV.
Right.
So, hey, listen, I want to remind you as well, as we thank our analysts once again, that as results are coming in, you'll see them at the bottom of your screen in case there's some races there that we haven't talked about that you're interested in. There are so many to get to. A lot of no huge surprises yet, but you know, the counting is a long ways from over in the governor's race, even though Kathy Hochul has taken an early lead, much as expected, with the absentee ballots, mail-ins, if you will, that are being counted as they came in this year, and of course, the early voting. We're going to take a break right now, and we'll be back with more after this.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on your side.
And welcome back. I'm Dave McKinley. We've been speaking with our analysts tonight, Jessica Schuster and Carl Calabrese, quite a bit. But the time for talking is over as more and more of these numbers come in. And that's where Michael Wooten comes in right now to update us on several key races. Michael.
Hey, Dave, so here's the big picture in terms of the governor's race right now. You can see we're starting to see the map colored in a little bit, although there are still plenty of counties across the state that haven't reported anything. They haven't reported their early vote, their mail votes, nothing. That includes Orleans, Genesee, Wyoming, and Allegheny counties in western New York. We have nothing from those counties right now. Hopefully that changes soon. We do have results, though, from our 4 counties here. And before we get to those, I want to kind of show you, again, big picture. This is 34%. That doesn't mean 34% of the precincts across the state are reporting. It means from the Associated Press, they believe about a third of the vote is in when you look at the total vote. So keep that in mind as we're kind of going through this, because a good chunk of that is still early vote and mail vote, which would favor Kathy Hochul. So the margin looks massive right now, almost a 30-point difference. That will shrink as we go throughout the night. But there are trouble signs for Lee Zeldin when you look in New York City right now, and I want to show them to you. We'll zoom in here. This is New York County, better known as Manhattan, and 92% of the expected vote has been counted. All the early vote, all of the mail-in votes, as long as they were received by a couple of days ago, and then almost all of the day of vote. And the margin there is 82-18. The Zeldin campaign felt like they had to do a lot better than Donald Trump did 2 years ago in a place like Manhattan. There it was even more of a blowout, 87-12. So Lee Zeldin's doing a little better than Donald Trump, but not by a whole lot. And there are so many votes downstate that you really got to shrink some of those margins. If we go to the Bronx right now, again, almost 9 in 10 votes have been counted there. The margin 77-23. Similar story in Queens, 64-36, not quite the margin. So where does Lee Zeldin make up for those votes? We'll get to Western New York in a moment. He's looking out on Long Island right now. This is Suffolk County. It's where he was born. It's where he lives now. It's where the community that he represents in Congress. We don't have very much vote in there at all. I don't even think this is the entire early vote. In fact, I know it's not, because we've only got a little over 5,000 votes counted, but it's 68-32 Zeldin. The question is going to be, can he drive up turnout in Suffolk County? We'll look at Nassau County as well, very little vote in. But can he increase turnout by huge margins out on Long Island, and then maintain big margins to make up for just the blowout, again, that's happening in Manhattan, 82-18. So that's kind of big picture. As we look specifically, just got an update there. We'll zoom out and look specifically at Western New York. Erie County is the lone blue county right now, but this has changed dramatically over the last little bit. If you joined us, early on, shortly after 9 o'clock, we were getting just the early and mail votes in, and Kathy Hochul was just running away with it. If you look at mail vote, it's 70-30. The early vote margins, 64-36. I mean, not even close. But if we look just at the day of vote, so people who went to the polls today, the margins, 47% for Kathy Hochul, 53% for Lee Zeldin, and a lot more people are voting on Election Day. So if Lee Zeldin can maintain this as we continue to count more and more of the day of vote, there's still a third of it almost left to count, we could see this shrink even more. Now, Democrats will tell you there are some Democrat strongholds in Erie County, places like Cheektowaga, City of Buffalo. Those places, some communities there, at least precincts, have not yet reported. So we'll see if Hochul can do better there. But this is closer. We mentioned earlier, Hochul campaign was hoping to get 55%. Not looking great there right now when you have almost 7 in 10 votes in Erie County already in. So let me get rid of that. We'll do a zoom around the rest of the region. Niagara County, this says 0%. It's because at this point, the way Niagara County reports its results, we don't know how much of the day of vote is in. We know all the early vote is in, and all of the mail votes that they're allowed to count have been counted, but we don't know how much of the day in vote has been counted. It's quite a bit of it, because look, we've got almost or in fact more than 60,000 votes. Lee Zeldin is up 60-40. It's a healthy margin, right? It's 20 points. Again, I want to go back to 2020, not to compare this race necessarily to that. That was a presidential race, huge turnout, different electorate. But when you look at the margins there, Donald Trump only beat Joe Biden by 10 points. So if we go back to this year, Lee Zeldin is doubling that, right? He's up 60-40. The problem there is for the entire state of New York, the margins were huge. So Zeldin has to overperform in places like Niagara County by more than just 10 percentage points. So that's kind of something to watch as we go on. But again, we don't know how much of the day of vote has been counted. And as day of vote is trending Zeldin, maybe those margins can change. So that's Niagara County. Let's go down to Cattaraugus County. Not a whole lot of vote in right now. It's pretty close, but you're looking at just a little over 4,000 votes. And then Chautauqua County, always the winner on the board, 98% of the vote in. They're almost completely done in Chautauqua County. They know how to do it right there. And look, Lee Zeldin up 30 points over Kathy Hochul. This is the type of margin that he would want to see replicated in a lot of the other rural counties around the state, because again, you got to make up for that difference in places like Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, that sort of thing. I want to see how it was 2 years ago. Donald Trump beat Joe Biden by just 20 points in Chautauqua County, and Lee Zeldin is beating Kathy Hochul by 30 points. So you got to increase that margin in these communities to overcome, again, the massive difference that we saw statewide. So Dave, we'll toss it back over to you unless you have any questions. I mean, we can see a lot of the other counties here coloring in a little bit, but many of them have not reported a whole lot of votes at this hour.
As someone who is always terrible at math, we appreciate your efforts, Michael.
I don't think I miscounted anything, but I'll double check.
Oh, no, I would bet on him all day, folks. Yeah, we are continuing to watch the votes come in, and you can see the results as we have them throughout our broadcast here on the bottom of your screen. And we want to remind you that we do have reporters at Hochul headquarters in New York City and at Zeldin headquarters in New York City. We're the only television station in Western New York based here to have reporters down in Gotham tonight for what looks to be, we're almost 10-year, we take a look at the latest numbers. Is that what you're telling us? Okay, there they are right now. So, again, as Michael just explained, and our analysts have explained, it came out to turnout, and specifically turnout where. That is going to drive these numbers, but it also appears that, we may be up late counting votes this year, as opposed to even 4 years ago. So as we continue to watch these numbers come in, as we continue to talk a little bit about some of these races, no big surprise in many of them, but we're watching. And of course, we also remind our viewers that NBC is covering on Channel 2 these national races too. And are there any particular Senate seats you thought might go one way or another? We just have a minute before our next break.
Well, I really thought Pennsylvania would go blue. I really
Right.
thought John Fetterman would pull that out. I haven't seen the results lately, so I'm not sure where that's at. But
Yeah, I thought Pennsylvania, I was watching that closely, that went in just about dead even. Arizona, Blake Masters versus Mark Kelly got very, very close at the end. Even New Hampshire, where the incumbent Senator Hassan had a 9.5, 10-point lead for all summer into the fall. All of a sudden, within the last 2 weeks, it became even. So, those are the ones I was watching, and we'll be watching as the votes come in tonight.
When we return, if we have time, I'd like to ask you both if we generally here in New York State or anywhere tend to care more about those races in those other places than we may have years ago. But we're going to have to take a break, and we will be back with more of our coverage of Decision 2022.
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on Your Side.
Thanks for joining 2 on Your Side for another election update. I'm Mary Alice Demler.
And I'm Scott Levin. Polls closed at 9 o'clock, and we are getting a look now at several races across the state tonight.
2 on Your Side's Michael Wooten is in the studio with us looking at some of those numbers. Michael?
Hey, Mary Alice and Scott. So kudos to a couple of our counties here in Western New York because we've got almost all of their votes in. I'm going to start in Chautauqua County because they really did the best. Look at that, 100%, everything in. And the margin there for Lee Zeldin, pretty healthy, 65 to 35, a 30-point swing there for Lee Zeldin. Of course, not a ton of people living in Chautauqua County when you look at the whole state. So he's got to replicate that in a lot of the more rural counties. Erie County is the other one. 95% now of the total vote is in. All the early vote, all the mail vote, and almost all of the day of vote. And it's going to end up being close to that 5 or 6 point spread, 53-47. The Hochul campaign, we were told, would like to hit that 55% mark. But there were a little bit of troubling signs early on as the day of vote was coming in. Lee Zeldin was really running away with it, but then some of the Democratic strongholds in Erie County started to report their votes, and now it's kind of evened things out. So 53-47 is what we're looking at here. Big picture, though, a lot of the people live in New York City. This is where Kathy Hochul is still running up huge margins. Look at Manhattan, 82-18. Should be getting a lot more of the vote downstate coming up in a little bit, guys, so stay tuned for that.
All righty, Michael, thank you for the update there. And our team coverage continues down in New York City. Tonight, our Claudine Ewing is live from Kathy Hochul's campaign headquarters.
Claudine, Hochul is showing an early lead over her Republican challenger, Lee Zeldin. They've got to be liking that there.
You know, that is probably the case, but I'm going to tell you something. I talked with a few people here, and right now the mood is simply just hopeful because they want to actually see real numbers and see what happens in the end. The crowd has definitely grown here at the Capitol where we are. I can tell you it's probably easily about 600 to 700 people behind me in this location. We've heard from Senator Chuck Schumer. Senator Gillibrand has been making her rounds, talking with reporters, talking with people, all of them touting the reason why they believe that Kathy Hochul will come out victorious tonight. We are told that Kathy Hochul will address the crowd whether or not, depending on what the results are, it doesn't matter. She is going to address this crowd because the faithful are out here for her tonight. We're just waiting to hear who's going to speak next. It's very interesting, I can say, from covering campaigns over the years. Usually you see a lot of people taking the podium back and forth. That has not been the case, so we're hoping to see maybe some action by 11 p.m. For now, we're going to send it to Midtown. That's where Rob Hackford is standing by with the Zeldin camp.
Yeah, Claudine, despite those early numbers showing that Governor Hochul is leading this race right now, you wouldn't know it based on the reactions from the crowd here. There was a brief cheer just a short few minutes ago when Long Island was shown on the map on television behind me. It was a red wave throughout Long Island. The crowd is still very active here and enjoying the evening and very excited to see where this race will end up with Congressman Zeldin, potentially and looking to make some votes back and taking back some of these votes with Hochul leading at the current moment. But I am going to send it back to the studio for now in Midtown Manhattan. Rob Hackford, Channel 2 News.
All right, Rob, thank you very much. We're going to continue to follow the New York governor's race and several other races of interest across New York as our election night coverage continues.
Dave McKinley picks up our coverage on Channel 2.2 and streaming on WGRZ.com. He's got expert political analysts Carl Calabrese and Jessica
You're watching Decision 2022 continuing coverage from 2 on your side.
I'm Dave McKinley. Welcome back. We are with our analysts for the evening there, Carl Calabrese and Jessica Schuster. And before the break, we were just kind of talking a little bit about, and I hope it's because I'm paying too much attention to Twitter more than I should. But this kind of phenomenon where we here in Western New York or folks in Southern Virginia or other parts, we seem to be caring a great deal about gubernatorial races in Arizona and Senate races. And even though we do have an audience in Pennsylvania, and it didn't seem to be that way. And I remember watching election results from years gone by. You'd wait until they'd get to New York and now it seems like everyone has so much at stake in these governors in other states, things like that. What do you make of that?
You're right, and I think it's because we've become so polarized, and the issues have polarized us, and so all of a sudden every race, whether it be a Senate, Congress, governor, takes on some type of national significance as a sign of things to come, good, bad, or ugly. And so I think that's a reason why is that we've become just so polarized. Everything has become politically supercharged. Every issue, every race, and it draws us into what's going on in Arizona tonight, what's going on in Colorado. And you know, when I was growing up, you maybe read about it the next day, and that was it, in passing. Now it's front and center.
And you have to be really into politics to even keep track of it.
Yeah, I think you're probably asking the wrong group of people if now is the time that we're finding these races more interesting, because I always found them interesting. But I think that this year especially, you can't underscore the importance of the Dobbs decision in terms of setting the national tone for women. And so I think that when we talk about races like the Senate race in Georgia or Ohio, you are talking about rights that were once, constitutionally guaranteed to a majority of the population in this country. Women care. People care. I think to Carl's point, though, yes, I mean, polarization is something that we're seeing. I think I said earlier, Tip O'Neill once said all politics is local, and that's just not the case anymore. All politics is national. So in a state like New York, where most often there is not viable Republican challengers, it does seem that we are kind of paying more attention outside. But I think there's a variety of factors that explain that.
All right. Someone who considered running for the Democratic nomination for governor and actually polled quite well after Andrew Cuomo resigned and Kathy Hochul, as lieutenant governor, ascended to the mantle of leadership in New York State was Letitia James. She obviously was expected to be reelected to her post as Attorney General. She dropped out of consideration running a Democratic primary. We go to her remarks now from just a short time ago.
That this election was crucial, and you came out in droves, particularly in New York City. And particularly in my beloved borough, Brooklyn. Is Brooklyn in the house? So I want to say thank you to everyone who supported my campaign, whether you donated $5 or $5,000. Everyone who knocked on doors and who made phone calls, who handed out literature or talked to your friends and your family. Every elected official, community leader, union member, and faith leader throughout New York who supported me, I will be forever grateful for your support and friendship. My small but mighty campaign, Yvette Buckner, Michael Fasulo, Kimberly Peeler-Allen, Luis Miranda.
Okay, so Brooklyn is in the house.
Dave, I'd like to make a point about Letitia James, something I said earlier about the power of incumbency to raise money early and scare away good candidates. Classic example. One of the things Kathy Hochul did very well and very early was to raise gobs of money. And Letitia James, I think, who was considered a very strong challenger if she did decide to get in a primary, looked at that bank account and said, no way. I think that's a direct result of the power of incumbency to raise money and scare away potential challengers.
Carl and I are sharing a hive mind because I was going to bring up the same thing, that, you know, the governor was a prolific fundraiser very early in her campaign, and I think that absolutely did dispel any challenges in the primary.
Even though she's from New York City, and we've talked about that ad nauseum tonight, about how that vote is so important. And some wondered when Kathy Hochul ascended to the governor's office when Andrew Cuomo resigned, okay, now you've got to get elected if you choose to run. And there were some people that were just convinced ain't no way that the people in New York City are going to let somebody from Buffalo, New York be the governor.
Letitia James has a national profile. I mean, she is the Attorney General that is taking on Donald Trump. I think many Democrats still see her as, you know, a real hero to the party. So I don't know how much she sacrificed in terms of notoriety. And I have no idea what the Attorney General's plans are following, if she has any. But I don't know that it was worth the fight for what she would gain by having to go through a primary, which, you know, always manages to kind of weaken our candidates a little bit. And I think that, you know, she's doing great work for the people of New York right where she is, and she probably also kind of felt that pull herself.
I would guess she was disappointed in not being able to run because of that huge war chest Kathy Hochul built up. She might have a high profile as an Attorney General, but not like you would as governor of New York. I mean, a governor of New York, as far back, you know, as the earliest days of a republic, is almost automatically considered presidential material. It's that kind of high profile. And, you know, everyone thought Andrew Cuomo was a money-raising machine. Kathy Hochul surpassed that. So, you know, she very, very smart politics raising that kind of money.
Why do you think that is?
Well, again, it's the power of incumbency as a governor of New York.
But how Andrew Cuomo was a prolific
Yes,
fundraiser
absolutely.
too. So did she approach it differently? Did she approach different people?
I don't know. I really don't. All I know is what the bottom line showed was I think she spent an awful lot of time. She may have had some very good advisors identifying some donors that maybe didn't come to the table before, or donors that came to the table before and now would come with even more money. But whatever she did it very well, very early, and because of that, she avoided Letitia James.
I think Kathy Hochul probably assembled, and I know she assembled, a very capable campaign team that started almost immediately when she took office. I also think that, you know, there is a benefit to incumbency, but there's also baggage that comes with being a governor who has served multiple terms, right? And so I'm sure Andrew Cuomo in his time made some enemies, people that may have wanted to come back to the table and may have wanted a seat at the table with Governor Kathy Hochul. So I think those are, you know, possibilities. Certainly that's all anecdotal. Carl and I don't know. What we do know is that she had a great campaign finance report.
Yes, she did.
All right. Well, there's an old saying. I know you like them too.
I do.
It's tough to steer the ship of state, and perhaps none harder to turn than the ship of New York. And three-term governors going for fourths. We saw it with Mario Cuomo. George Pataki served 3 terms, but the writing was on the wall for him. And of course, Andrew Cuomo sought it for other reasons, of course. These allegations of sexual harassment and what happened during COVID, he resigned, so he never got it. But it does seem that it's a tough job to be the governor of New York, and after 3 terms, do you think that people just get sick of anybody after 3 terms?
It depends. Not so much with legislators.
Talking about the governor.
Governor, that's my point. Being an executive of anything, a town supervisor, a mayor of a city, governor of New York, you make enemies, and they all have a shelf life, and generally it's 3 terms. The record of people going for a 4th term at the executive level is not real good, whereas legislators can go 10, 15, 20 years because they don't have to make the hard decisions that anger people that an executive has to make. So yeah, it comes with the territory.
Unless you're Franklin Roosevelt, and unless it was legal for you to do
or
so
Byron Brown. Byron Brown's the exception.
Brown, there you go. Okay, well, speaking of Democrats, let's go live to our Ron Plants. He's at the Democratic headquarters at the Irish Center in South Buffalo. Good evening, Ron.
Good evening, Dave. Yeah, I can tell you that now here with the Democratic election headquarters, we're starting to get some idea of how the legislature candidates fared. We do notice that Sean Ryan in that contested 61st district against Republican Ed Rath, the two incumbents there. It does appear that Ryan is out to a pretty big lead right now. But some of the other races, too, were kind of interesting, especially when it came to the state assembly. We do know that Monica Wallace had quite a challenge on her hands, with a lot of money being poured in by the Republicans, who apparently felt that she might be vulnerable. And then also in the new 142nd district, that would be Pat Burke, who had held that seat prior. It was the 143rd district and actually took in parts of Orchard Park. Now it's more centered up into West Seneca with redistricting. And if we can, we were going to toss to some sound we had with Assemblymember Pat Burke, who does appear to have a good lead at this point over his Republican candidate. We'll try to go that now.
I trust my voters to do the right thing, but it's a different type of year. It's post-COVID, Biden presidency, midterms, a Democratic governor who is in a more competitive race than anyone thinks she should be, right? But I feel good in my district. But I'm not in the prediction business. I'm in the do the work and see how it shakes out.
So again, that's the situation in terms of those. That's again the situation in terms of those legislative districts. Again, we're hoping to get more numbers as they come in and see if there's more announcements up on stage here. We have not seen Senator Ryan at this point. We will look for him, and perhaps he'll be proclaiming victory as well in the near future. So that's the situation here at Democratic headquarters at the Irish Center in South Buffalo. Dave, we'll send it back to you.
All right, there we are. Ron Plants, thank you very much. There was another race that we talked about when we were taking a little break, and we were talking about some races a little while ago across the country that we used to not care too much about. Every race is important, but judicial races are something that not often are on the tip of our tongues. But we were talking about the race for 8th Judicial District, Justice, and Joe Lorigo, who has been a stalwart for his side in the county legislature for many years.
Yeah, so the 8th Judicial District, we saw 2 cross endorsements this year and then 1 competitive race. So, and I know Carl and I talked that we both served judicial delegates, and it's kind of an interesting process. But basically, we had 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans who were cross endorsed by both parties. And then we had Shannon Hennigan, city court judge, run against Joe Lorigo in the 8th Judicial District, which is the counties of Erie, Niagara, Wyoming, Cattaraugus. Yeah, it's an expansive district.
Sure.
And so, that race was head-to-head, and I think, a tough race, I think, for a Democrat. Democrats have had some success in the recent years. Amy Martocci was the last one I can remember that was successful in the 8th JD running. So yeah, I mean, I think that Shannon probably needed to get to around 60% of the vote in Erie County, and she didn't quite seem to do that to build up that firewall for what we would expect to come in from the outlying counties. But kudos to her, well qualified, running against an opponent who was not deemed qualified. So
it's interesting. We were both judicial delegates, and it's almost a meaningless job, okay? The decisions are made by the party chairs in advance. They assemble delegates because that's the law, and they have a mini convention on a Saturday morning, and the decisions of the chairman are kind of rubber stamped, and that's the way the process works. It's probably the worst process you can think of in terms of how we choose judges, but that's the way we do it, and there's always talk about reforming it, and the reform never happens. But these decisions are made by the 2 party chairs. There's often trade-offs, there's often deals made, and it's like, like they say about making sausage, it's not very pretty to watch. And I think that pretty much sums up my opinion of how judges are selected and the process for it.
But you spent some time in the legislature yourself.
I did work there, yeah.
So the Republicans are in the minority. Joe
so I'll just correct you and say the minority caucus, because Joe Lorigo is a registered conservative.
Sir, if I can finish. Yes,
yeah.
As I was just about to say,
yep.
He is, but he does side with the minority caucus, so they have some work to do too.
He's the minority leader, so if elected, which I suspect he will be, there will then trigger a process where the Republican, I guess, or Conservative Party chair will make a recommendation, so they will have a new member, but they will also be finding new leadership because he's the minority leader.
Right.
So they could go with, a member that's already seated, potentially the new member, who's yet to be probably determined. And so there will be some shakeup for the county legislature, who all runs next year. So, that'll be an interesting thing to watch for, I think, to see where the leadership falls in that dynamic.
I always found it fascinating, all the people I've known in politics over the years and those who are lawyers. Amazing how many of them, the high percentage, envision wearing the robes someday and see themselves ascending to a judgeship. It kind of comes with the territory.
It's steady work. It's a 14-year term, isn't it?
And people call you judge and your honor, and it's quite nice.
They even give you clothes.
There's probably less arguments, too.
Right. Kind of not stylish, but yeah.
Good. All right, very good. We are with Jessica Schuster and Carl Calabrese. I'm Dave McKinley, and we've been talking about Decision 2022 as the results come in. We invite you to keep following us here and, of course, on Channel 2 News at 11, where you'll hear from our reporters down in New York City at the Hochul campaign headquarters, at the Zeldin campaign headquarters. Michael Wooten keeping close tabs on the races as the numbers come in, and, of course, you can see them there on the bottom of your screen. With 40% reporting, for instance, Kathy Hochul with a healthy lead over Lee Zeldin. We're waiting for a lot of the day of vote, but as Michael's pointed out, and if you two have pointed out that perhaps he had to try to do something that was very hard for a Republican to do, and that's get 30% of the vote in New York City, and it does not look like he's going to get that. So that does not bode well for him. There is a congressional race to the east of us, and this one involves the incumbent Joe Morelli, and the challenger is a Republican, LaRon Singletary, former Rochester police chief. I know we have that number running on the screen, but it's very, very, I want to note that it's just 2% of the vote coming in. That is a mostly Democratic district, mostly Monroe County, with a couple of towns over in New Orleans and west of Monroe County as well. But that shaped up to be a pretty interesting race too. One that maybe Mr. Morelli didn't expect to be as close as it got closer to Election Day. But that one is one we're keeping an eye on as well throughout the night.
David, for some reason, I ended up on Joe Morelli's email blast list, and I was getting all of his email blasts the last few weeks. And yeah, to say that he was nervous would be an understatement. He definitely feared a red wave and was sending out almost frantically appeals for volunteers, for money, for involvement, and you could see it, you could feel it in the emails that I was reading.
I get blasts from North Carolina. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this year, I think more than any other, we saw a barrage of text messages, emails, phone calls in the coming days. And perhaps that's just the changing nature of politics now. We talked about the nationalization on a broader scale.
Or how we message.
But it certainly was, I think, I think it contributed to some voter fatigue. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that from individuals.
Well, we had voter fatigue as long as I've been following these things. It was the TV commercials and the mailers,
the robocall,
and the radio, and then later came the robocall. Now they're on the darn phone here.
Yeah. I mean, I think,
from North Carolina.
I think that there's a lot of things that will be discussed after this election, but certainly turnout as a problem, and not as a problem for Democrats or Republicans, but apparently in this election, maybe overall a problem. And I do think some of that is the fact that, in this area we had 3 primaries we had a special and 2 primaries this year. People have been voting and kind of getting assaulted given the 2020 presidential election and COVID, which kind of kept them in their homes. I do think there's something to be made about people being tired. And so when we talk about messaging in the economy too, I think, people are just probably tired in general. And so I think that we'll see that probably played into some of their decisions tonight.
Although I think there is one thing that has surpassed political advertising and robocalls and everything else in terms of making people feel fatigued, Camp Lejeune.
Right.
I mean, I'm getting robocalls on Camp Lejeune, emails on Camp Lejeune, television commercials.
I'll see your Camp Lejeune and raise you one. Your car warranty has expired. Speaking of redistricting and the impact it's had in our area, parts of our viewing audience are in a congressional seat where they're going to have to get familiar with the name Claudia Tenney, apparently. She has declared victory in this race for the 24th Congressional District, 65% to 35% for Stephen Holden, with about 55% of the vote in. But Tenny has taken upon herself, as we understand, to declare victory in that race. And that's going to be, for those unfamiliar, she represented an area closer to Syracuse.
Utica, yeah.
Yeah, through that area. Redistricting, she's going to be all the way over toward, Wyoming County?
It's Niagara County, the North Country, Finger Lakes. Yeah, it really is kind of a,
here, I'll go this way. It's this one. It's the kind of the horseshoe around the district that we were talking about with Joe Morelli, which is largely Monroe County. So hopefully she's going to be up on agriculture, tourism, lake levels, whoever, and from one end to the other. What was that? Is that the one, Watertown, all the way to almost Youngstown?
I think so. It's the North Country that I'm probably,
Watertown.
And goes all the way. Ontario, Seneca, Yates, Wayne counties. All of those are included.
It's kind of crazy.
And she, she did a major move coming from, the Utica area all the way down to our area, and really kind of threw a monkey wrench into a number of people's plans for advancement. I mean, former Senator Kathy Young was very interested in maybe going to Congress. State Senator George Borrello, very interested in going to Congress. But again, when she decided to move down and run in this new district, what did they look at? They looked at her bank account. They looked at the war chest and said, no, they're going to pass this time. So we've talked about that a few times tonight, the power of money in not just winning a race, but discouraging potential opponents from entering a race.
It's what got us the name Pierre Renfray years ago.
You remember that? I was at the state Republican convention when they nominated him, probably the most disastrous candidate in New York State Republican Party history.
Pierre Renfray.
Pierre Renfray.
Yeah, yes, I do remember Pierre Renfray. If you asked me where I put my car keys 5 minutes ago, I can't help you. I also still buy stamps and write checks. Speaking of congressional races, Associated Press has called the race for Brian Higgins. No surprise there. We do have some numbers there. Well, there we go. 66% over Stephen Sams with 34%, and that was with all of the votes reporting, all the districts reporting anyway. And of course, as we talked about earlier tonight, Nick Langworthy declaring victory after his Democratic opponent conceded that race in the 23rd. There you see the numbers, and that was with 53% reporting, but it was enough for Max Delapia to concede the race to Nick Langworthy. More results from our Michael Wooten now. He's over there at the board. Michael?
Question for you, and hopefully your microphone stays up on this. Have you reported NBC has now declared Letitia James the winner in the AG's race? Did you get that?
Yes, I think we did talk about that a while ago.
I know she declared victory, but
we had some comments from Miss James, yes.
Yeah.
Brooklyn was in the house.
Initially, it seemed like she claimed victory a little bit early. I don't think Associated Press has called it yet. I could be wrong. That may have happened within just the past little bit. But that, another significant development in the state. Of course, the marquee race, though, is for governor. We've been following the numbers all night long, and something really surprising that we just noticed. So we rely on the Associated Press to tabulate the totals and do that for county by county across New York State. We take care of our part of the region so we can make sure we have the very latest numbers. We have a team of people in a conference room constantly tabulating all that, putting everything in our system. So we make sure we have the absolute latest numbers for our region, but we're at the mercy of the Associated Press when it comes to the rest of the state. All night long, I've been looking at Suffolk County because this is home to Lee Zeldin. It's where he's expected to do very well. The numbers right here, look at this. It's 3,600 votes to 1,600 votes. Barely any vote at all recorded in Suffolk County, not even all the early votes. So we're like, what is going on? Well, just looked and touched base with the Suffolk County Board of Elections. The AP has not updated this yet, but with 25% of the total vote in, so again, we still have 3 out of 4 votes to count, but it's Lee Zeldin right now with 51% and Kathy Hochul with 49%. I don't know what part of Suffolk County is reporting and what part is not. There could be some complicating factors there, but a 2-point spread for Lee Zeldin in Suffolk County is definitely not good news. So this is something we're going to have to follow very closely as we go throughout the rest of the night. We mentioned, I'll clear this out and get you back, in New York City, Manhattan right now, this is Queens 63-37. In Manhattan, it's 82-18. Big margins here. Still a lot to vote to count statewide. I mean, if we zoom out, 41% of the total vote is believed to be in right now, so still 6 out of 10 votes to count, but a healthy margin for Kathy Hochul right now. And if Lee Zeldin doesn't do really well on Long Island, hard to see a pathway there. So we'll be following that over the next little bit.
All right. Yep, Michael, very good. It also looks like Mickey Kearns is well on his way to be reelected county clerk. The only countywide race in Erie County this year.
Correct, yes. This is the only countywide race in the cycle this year. Next year, the legislature and the county executive will run.
Oh, well, I hope you'll be back. God
see.
willing. God willing.
If I'm available.
willing, yeah.
If I'm available, Dave.
Well, we hope you'll consider joining us. We appreciate you joining us too here as we've been here for a couple of hours now, running down the results, getting some great analysis from Jessica Schuster and Carl Calabrese, and we're going to continue doing that for you. And of course, a reminder that you're going to be hearing from our reporters in New York City, where the campaign headquarters are for both Kathy Hochul and Lee Zeldin, as this race riveting to New York State as a whole. We'll see how it shapes up as more of the vote comes in. And of course, maybe when we come back, we'll get an update on some of these congressional races too, and what else is going on in the country. Stay with us.
But that's Suffolk, you said? Yes.
Check 1 2 1 2 1 2.
Test 1 2, test 1 2.
All right, thank you. Hey, Zachy, I'm in the...
No, we're good. I'm not getting that. I'm not either. No, thank you. Thank you.
We're trying to repair the IFB. Hang on a second.
Test 2-2, Claudine. Yes, you wouldn't know that the governor was leading at this point in the evening, given the atmosphere and inviting elements.